Hello, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thanks for watching another video on our leaders. Today we will be covering Milos Zeman, the president of Czech Republic, and Klaus Iohannis, the president of Romania. I also have at the bottom of this slide the quote, "Those who stand for nothing fall for everything" by Alexander Hamilton. I'm not actually sure even precisely when or where he might have said or written this, respectively. However, I'm currently reading the Federalist Papers by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, and I think not only does this quote very well elucidate one of the main messages that he tried to get across in these papers and through his presidency, but also one of the main themes that I'd like to express throughout this video, and I think a commonality between Milos Zeman and Klaus Iohannis. So I'll get to that later in the comparison, but without further ado, we shall begin with Milos Zeman. So Milos Zeman is a Czech politician. He is the third and current president of the Czech Republic since the Czechoslovakia was dissolved. He first came into the position as president in March of 2013 when he was about 68 to 69 years old, which is not too old for a president. However, he is now 76, so getting a little bit on the older side, but I would definitely not say beyond a reasonable age, considering especially all of the major world leaders. I think the majority are over the age of 70 anyways. He was previously prime minister from 1998 to 2002, and he was leader of the Social Democratic Party in the 1990s, where he transformed the party from a sort of a somewhat secondary party to one of the major political forces in the Czech Republic. He also is Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, which is the equivalent of the lower house in the Czech Republic, as well. He served that position in 1996 to 1998, and he was also, in terms of his presidency, he could claim quite a bit of fame or success in being the first president to be directly elected in the presidential history of the Czech Republic. So the two previous presidents, that being Václav Havel and Václav Klaus, were elected by parliament. So he was actually directly elected by the people. So very many people consider him to be a populist, and I think rightfully so based on the way his election had and has turned out. He has also, previously the other two presidents were, as mentioned, elected by Parliament, which would have been the amalgamation of the Chamber of Deputies being the lower house and the Senate, the upper house, the upper house is actually elected through direct elections. However, the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies would select a president previously. However, he was selected directly through the people. And this was a change, and people worried that this might take away some powers from the prime minister, as perhaps it might have been revealed throughout his own presidency. But nonetheless, it's quite a big success, at least from his part. And once again, in 2018, he won again as president in a direct election, winning 66.6% of the vote. 66.6% voter turnout, which was actually the highest voter turnout in the history of the Czech Republic, or at least since 1998. But nonetheless, a very successful person in terms of popularity. But we shall firstly begin with his early life. He was born on the 28th of September, 1944. He was born in Kolín, which is in Center Bohemian region of the Czech Republic. His parents divorced when he was 2 years old, and he was raised predominantly by his mother, who was actually a teacher, which I think is it seems to be a pretty common thing for a lot of these leaders to be have parents who were teachers. I think firstly, a teacher makes a good parent because they don't tend to be overly protective, or because they have in effect many other children at their own school, so they are able to sort of view their own child with a little bit of humility. Whereas another parent who might have only one child might tend to hold on to them too closely, seeing them as their only perhaps legacy. Similarly, they also tend to be better teachers and just good with children. So I think a good thing, despite not having a father, which obviously would have made for a difficult upbringing. In terms of the city of Kolin, it has a population of 31,690, a pretty small town. However, it has a history of, it produced Zyklon B for Nazi Germany, and it was actually bombed during the oil campaign in World War II as it was supplying oil to Nazi Germany, and it was bombed by the Allied powers. So quite a big, this probably were obviously stories that he was familiar with growing up, and he was familiar with some of the atrocities that had happened just even as he was up until 1 year old, because he was born in 1944. World War II ended in 1939 to 1945. So obviously very familiar with the atrocities of the late 20th or mid 20th century. It's, however, despite the small size of Kolin, it's about 55 kilometers east of Prague, which is the capital of the Czech Republic. So not, despite being small, it's not completely removed or isolated. It's similarly on the Elbe River, which obviously I think growing up closer to a river, one gets a little bit of a broader perspective of one's ability to be able to travel. But that's completely speculation. But nonetheless, he went to Kolin High School, and then he went on to the University of Economics in Prague. He graduated high school in 1965 and graduated from the University of Economics in Prague in 1969 when he was about 20. So he was at university from 21 to 25 years old, which is, I guess, a little bit older for an undergraduate degree. But to my understanding, it's not uncommon, especially given those times, for people to perhaps start university slightly later. And it's completely within the reasonable realm of academic ability. In terms of the University of Economics in Prague, I have quite a few friends, actually, 3 friends from the Czech Republic, all of whom went to the University of Economics Prague. It's generally considered to be the best business school in all of the Czech Republic. However, some dispute that it could be another, but I think most people consider it to be the best. However, the actual top universities generally are the Charles University and Masaryk University. However, for someone who's interested in business, I definitely think he went to the right place. It also had many famous alumni as well who had been successful in politics, so a great place for him to go. In 1968, during his studies, he joined during the Prague Spring, where protests were made against the communist state of Czechoslovakia, because this was prior to the dissolution of Czechoslovakia. He joined the Communist Party. However, he was expelled in 1970, 2 years later, for opposition to the Warsaw Pact, which was the Warsaw Pact invasion was the plan by many of the socialist states, including East Germany and the Soviet Union, to invade Czechoslovakia. However, interestingly enough, Romania actually refused, and I think that's just important to note because Romania is the country we will be comparing the Czech Republic to today. And actually, this invasion was condemned by China, so also which at the time was also communist, and arguably still today is predominantly communist, depending on how you want to classify it. But I think that's important to note that both Romania and China condemned it at the time. But despite this, he did not agree with this, despite being part of the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia, so he was actually expelled. Similarly, this also, in 1971, he was also dismissed from his job, a job he had from 1971 to 1984, for similar reasons, for protesting against the communism in Czechoslovakia. I think this was obviously, I think he was taking risks, getting politically involved and speaking out against the Communist Party, and he lost a job for it. He got kicked out of organizations, so I think he was, at least he didn't fear too much the repercussions of speaking out, and I think that's one of the things that led him to be a great leader, in that he's willing to speak his mind. So actually, following getting dismissed from that job, he served for 13 years at a sports organization. I guess obviously passionate about athletics. I think he's a pretty athletic individual. Not always so. Obviously, there are a plethora of exceptions, but I do think there is a lot of these leaders tend to be at least care about their physical health and do tend to err in terms of interest in physical health. In 1984, when he was 40 years old, he worked at Agrodat. That was the name of the organization, which he worked at for 13 years, Agrodat, the sports organization. However, he lost his job in 1989, again at 45 years old, for writing an article titled Prognostica and Prostava, which basically focused, which translates to forecasting and prostroika, which is essentially perestroika. It was criticism towards communism, which was largely led by Gorbachev. And Gorbachev was the last leader of the Soviet Union who ultimately led to the eradication of the communism in the Soviet Union. Gorbachev is actually a very influential individual in my life because I actually got to see him do a public speech when I was in high school, and it really inspired me in terms of the significance of globalization and sort of the ways in which people can be so far led astray, based on certain ideologies. And also, another thing that really inspired me about Gorbachev was that he had such a position of power and he was willing to perhaps throw it all away. Not really. He still gained a lot of fame and such, but he did lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he was willing to give up that position. So I think that was something very admirable, at least for me. And that is something that also Zeman also evidently agreed with as for writing his article on that. In 1989, on the Czechoslovak television, he criticized the poor state of the economy. This was considered a pretty big scandal at the time, and however, this led him to getting the opportunity to meet many leaders of the Civic Forum during the Velvet Revolution. So I think this is when obviously many of his outspoken perspective starts really paying off, because he had lost jobs previously, he had been shunned, he'd been considered scandalous, he had been kicked out of the Socialist Party, but nonetheless finally he starts to get associations and involvement in the Velvet Revolution. Thus, in 1990, at 46 years old, he finally became member of the House of Nations of Czechoslovakia's Federal Assembly, which was the highest political body until the dissolution of Czechoslovakia in 1992, December 31st of 1992. So day one would have been 1993. In 1992, he successfully became member of the House of the People in Federal Assembly as member of the Czechoslovak Social Democracy Party, the CSSD, and in 1993 he became chairman of the party at 49 years old. So he was, perhaps you could consider, a little bit older to originally start getting involved in politics, being 46. However, he rose very quickly to become a chairman 3 years later at 49 years old. In 1996, the CSSD gained a great deal of success in the legislative election, partially or perhaps even predominantly as the result of his efforts, and his rival Václav Klaus of the Civil Democrat Party, or the CDP party, lost a lot of success. Thus, the ODS, is Václav Klaus's party was not able to form a majority of government due to the CSSD's great success, largely led by Zeman's leadership, and thus in 1996 he became Speaker of the House, he filled this position as Speaker of the House until 1998, where he became Prime Minister, which he ultimately ended early his efforts as the Speaker of the House to become Prime Minister in a minority government. So you're probably familiar, but it's very common for leaders across any 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 government to come from a Speaker of the House role into perhaps a prime minister, and for governments that have presidents, it's very common for them to become prime minister before becoming president. So this is all very common, but I think the speed at which he did it and the success that he attained for the CSSD party so quickly is definitely quite a phenomenon. In 2001, he defeated Viostika. He was defeated in his efforts to run again as prime minister, so he retired to the Vysotina region, pardon me for my pronunciation, which was in the countryside. His intention at this time, he claimed to be to retirement. As we know, he obviously did not stay for too long, and this was in April 2001 because he was defeated by Vladimir Spindla. However, in 2001, he won the presidential primary, so he because this was actually the first time that the Czech Republic had switched to a direct votes for the president. Previously, they had been elected by the Senate and the lower house, and however, he won in the primaries, but he lost to Václav Klaus due to party disunity. So the CSSD party lost support for him. So he became an outspoken critic of the party's leaders. So the party that he had made such efforts to grow, the CSSD, had sort of abandoned him, and now he was a critic of the party and had to ultimately start his own party, which he did in 2009, known as the Civic Rights Zemenovki Party. However, the party has not fared very well, however, as they have not won any seats in the 2010, 2013, or 2017 legislative elections, despite Zeman's great success in actually winning the first presidential election in 2013. So in 2012, February, he announced that he would return and run for the first direct presidential election in Czech Republic, which was to be in 2013. There were worries that switching to a direct election for the president could weaken the post of prime minister, which it obviously has proven to do. However, I think it is more democratic in that if the president is elected solely through the upper and the lower house, I think it's very possible for corruption to stir within the three groups, that being the president, the lower house, and the Senate. So I think it is better for them to directly vote for them, as sort of more similar to the U.S. system, or perhaps even the Russian system. And I do think it was generally a good decision. In the primaries, it was likely that he would face Jan Fischer, who is actually also an alumni from the University of Economics in Prague and a famous economist. However, he beat him in the first round and by a close margin, and then in the second round he beat Karel Schwarzenberg by a larger margin. And then he began his first term in 2013, being the first directly elected president in the history of the Czech Republic, the relatively short history of the Czech Republic, starting in 1993. In terms of his actual presidency, he's been criticized for alcoholism. It's said that he's been shown himself drunk on Czech television, as well as during the showing of the Bohemian Crown Jewels soon after his presidency. It's said that he was also drunk on this occasion, which he's also a chain smoker, which he's sort of cut back on. But obviously, if he can do his job, perhaps that's good. But I think it is a little bit of perhaps edging towards self-destructive behavior, which could not be fully idolized. He has... at one point, there was a Martin C. Putna who appeared in the 2011 Gay Pride Parade, and he refused to grant this individual tenured professorship. So he's somewhat a little bit anti-gay. In 2013, his coalition government supposedly had there was collusion, corruption, and spying scandal that led Prime Minister Peter Nečas have to step down and the dissolvement of his government, and he appointed his friend Jiří Rusnok. It said that this was a bit of a power grab, which evidently so. This is sort of what the people of the Czech Republic feared, with the president had perhaps too much power, and power was taken to the away from the prime minister. Evidently so, as he just sort of chose the next prime minister, but being directly elected by the people perhaps might in the future prevent against such things as this. With respect to his stance on the annexation of Crimea, we move to the first quote, which is, "The moment Russia decides to widen its territorial expansion to the eastern part of Ukraine, that is where the fun ends. There I would plead not only for the strictest EU sanctions, but even for military readiness of the North Atlantic Alliance, like, for example, NATO forces entering the Ukrainian territory." So obviously he was not in favor of the annexation of Crimea. Some of his opponents criticized him, saying that this would have negative economic impacts on the economy of the Czech Republic, which is perhaps true, but I think his stance in terms of the morality of the annexation of Crimea is obviously he was not in favor of it. From my perspective, I think it's a pretty sensitive topic, because I do think there was a large pro-Russian community in Crimea before the annexation who really did want it. So obviously annexation is never a good thing, especially if it's done by force. The Russia entering military vehicles into Crimea was obviously wrong. However, I guess whether it should have been switched is I guess up to the decision of the people who actually live in Crimea. And I don't know. I actually don't know anyone in Crimea, but perhaps there is a large portion of Russian people there who did really want it. But many people from the Ukraine have had to flee back to the Ukraine, the pro or the anti-Crimean annexation party. So pretty sensitive issue there, but evidently Zeman was not in favor of it. Similarly, or in contrast, however, during the Velvet Revolution anniversary, he went to visit Russia, and he was, or sorry, that was the Velvet Revolution anniversary in Czech Republic. He was criticized for his pro-Russian sentiment, and many of the protesters actually held up red cards, which is actually I think a testament firstly to his the country's interest in soccer or football, European football, or actually anywhere but United States soccer, where they held up red cards to Zeman. So firstly, this is red card, which symbolizes red, which would be communism, that mostly being Russia and China. Russia's not really a communist anymore, but the Soviet Union was symbolically red, so they held up red cards. But it also has a dual purpose in symbolizing that he should step down because of his support for Russia. So I think it's a nice piece of symbolism. However, they also pelted eggs at him, which is just a more direct outward disapproval of his somewhat pro-Russian ways. In 2017, he was there. Supposedly, some IT guys found hackers on his computer, and there was child pornography found on his computer. Later, his spokesperson said that Zeman had Googled his own name, and when searching for his own name, he happened to stumble upon some child pornography. Which story is right here? Did he actually look at pornography? Did he accidentally stumble upon him? Or was he hacked by supposedly some Alabama hackers from the United States? Who knows? But I definitely do not think if he is looking at child pornography, that is something that should be promoted, if anything, and even more so should be shamed, or even considered a criminal offense. More likely so. In the 2018 election, where he won, it was compared to the 2016 U.S. and the 2017 French elections, where it was characterized by the left-wing internationalists versus the right-wing populists. However, in the 2016 election, Donald Trump, representing the right-wing nationalist, won. However, in France, Marine Le Pen, representing the right-wing nationalists, actually lost. So it's similar in terms of the two parties, however different in terms of outcome. However, Zeman, represented the nationalist right. His opponent was Jiri Daros, who was more pro-European, and ultimately Zeman won by 51.37% in the second round. And in July 2019, very recently, he was the Senate proposed an impeachment for corruption and not dismissing certain cabinet members, and as well as interference in court cases. However, the impeachment did not hold, as they only achieved 58 of the 120 votes that were necessary to have him impeached. So actually not very close to getting impeached, but it could be a sign that something stronger might be coming. But who knows? But evidently the Senate isn't necessarily in full approval of his actions. So sort of with respect to the stance on whether he's right-wing or left-wing, he was formerly considered to be more left, especially in terms of being pro-European. However, he's now considered to be more right, as he is a little bit more anti-immigration, taking more anti-immigration. So pretty much since 2013 to 2018, he's moved from towards more of a popular rightist, and in the 2016 election campaign, he sort of Donald Trump, he sort of emphasized this by supporting Donald Trump's campaign. So he's sort of been characterized as more right-wing now. Similarly, he's also not only has he shown support for Russia, he has stated that he wished to learn from China's stabilization policies. So he actually invited China to visit in 2016, which upset many people in Czech Republic, and there were many protests. He says that anyone who is pro-Tibet is a mentally impaired individual, which I think is obviously a very bold statement. I think the people of Tibet perhaps should they have full autonomy? Probably so, but either way, I think there's a lot of people upset in Tibet who have not been treated well, and Zeman perhaps might be a little bit out of touch with these views. Therefore, he's been criticized by many people in the Czech Republic as being a bootlicker of authoritarian regimes, that being mostly Putin and Xi Jinping. In terms of gun control, he's following various terrorist attacks, mostly in 2016. He has urged the 240,000 gun holders to carry their guns to protect soft targets. In fact, his own wife supposedly holds a licensed revolver. So obviously he's in favor of gun control. My perspective on this is I think that's if there is an argument for holding guns, I think it would be more so to ultimately fight against government tyranny, if ever such a case were to be possible. But to carry them around for self-defense against terrorists, I think might lead to more negative repercussions than the positive potential benefits. But nonetheless, once again, a very sensitive issue. In terms of the EU, he formerly was considered a federalist, and I think he is still considered a federalist. He supported joining the EU, but when Czech Republic did join the EU, but he does support the talks of a referendum for the Czech Republic, similar to that which was achieved and won in terms of Brexit in the United Kingdom. So some of his opposition consider him to be a Eurosceptic. Also, he opposes the migrant quotas that are being applied to many states within the European Union. So I actually think the EU should stay together. I'll talk about this definitely more deeply at the end. However, I think his acceptance of a referendum might just be to perhaps allow the people to have a say. Does he actually want Czech Republic to leave the European Union? Is hard to say, but I think the people should have a right to vote, perhaps. In terms of Israel, he vehemently supported the U.S.'s recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I talked about this a bit more deeply in the video on Benjamin Netanyahu that I previously made. Also a very sensitive issue. And he called the EU cowards for not supporting Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The argument why it shouldn't be is that it sort of pushes the Islamic community aside and sort of shows favoritism towards the Israelis, which I do think to be true. But, who is right? Well, I think both sides are right. I think the Israelis are right in wanting it as their capital because it is their most holy site. But I also think the Islam community is right in not wanting it to be so. So I think, generally speaking, the U.S. and even the Czech Republic or even the EU should probably try to meddle with it as little as possible. In terms of the talks in terms of Kosovo, he has opposed recognizing Kosovo as a country. He believes it's a terrorist regime. Therefore, when there were talks of whether the Czech Republic should create an embassy in Kosovo, he did not allow for it. In terms of Serbia, he supports Serbia joining the EU. So this is once again showing signs of his support for federalist ideologies. Technically, the EU is not a federalism or even a confederacy, but towards a federalist ideology by wanting Serbia to join, despite his acceptance of a referendum for the Czech Republic. In terms of more directly, in terms of Islam, he believes that followers of the Quran are could be likened to followers of Nazism. I think that is a very wrong statement. I don't think perhaps particularly some of the terrorists, perhaps ISIL, Islamic State, sure, perhaps might have similar ideologies to that of Nazism, particularly believing their people to be superior to others. However, to say that all who follow the Quran, I think, is just wrong, completely wrong. If anyone were to even pick up the Quran, they'd realize that there is a lot of merit in that book. Therefore, we move to the second quote. He says, "The enemy is the anti-civilization spreading from North Africa to Indonesia. 2 billion people live in it, and it is financed partly from oil sales and partly from drug sales." So I just think this is just not good rhetoric to be coming from a leader of a country, especially I think just saying something like this breeds anti-Islam sentiments in his own country and abroad, and I think it's just shouldn't be said. It is. I don't think it can be denied that there are definitely certain terrorist organizations associated with Islam, but to say all 2 billion people is just absolutely wrong. He says. He also said that Turkey should not be part of the EU. He has criticized Erdogan for allying with Islamic State and for fighting against the Kurds. So I guess, I do support the Kurds. I think the Kurds actually deserve to have land of their own. But I think it would be nice if Turkey could join the EU. I just think the bigger and the stronger the EU gets, the more people get brought together, and the possibility for war decreases. So I don't necessarily fully agree with his stance there. In terms of Russia, as mentioned earlier, he has said thanks to Russians for preventing Czech Republic falling into Nazism during the Second World War, something that he is familiar with, being born in the last year of the war. However, he was criticized in 2015 for visiting Russia on Victoria Day. Supposedly he wasn't going to buy arms, but he was criticized for being one of the only leaders to go and support or to go and visit Russia, especially just following the annexation of Crimea. So quite a sensitive topic here, and this is where he gets the painted image that he is pro-authoritarian regimes. In terms of his personal life in the 1970s, he married an individual named Blanka Zemanova, who was he was in his 30s at this time. However, he divorced with her in 1978. He had a son with her named David. He is now an adult and has his own personal life. In 1993, however, he married his assistant, Ivana Bednarka-Sikova, who is born in 1965, so she's 21 years younger, which is obviously a bit of an age gap, but not beyond reasonableness. She was 44 years old when they got married, or he was 44 years old when they got married. Pardon me. And they have a daughter together named Katerina, who was born in 1994, so closer to my age actually. And she was actually considered the visible face in his 2018 elections, the informal first lady, as his wife was considered to be shy, so his daughter Katerina was represented the first lady at that time. He has neuropathy in his feet, so he has actually difficulties walking. As mentioned, he's a chain smoker and does drink a lot. He considers himself a tolerant atheist, so religiously tolerant, but no particular faith himself. So into the very last quote, and then into the pictures. And actually, first I'll tell you a bit more about the Czech Republic. So a population of about 10.65 million, pretty small. There are some cities that are larger than that. GDP of 245.2 billion, also quite small. Some of the 3 or 4 top billionaires in the world are about perhaps even bigger than the entire GDP of Czech Republic, and an area of 78,866 kilometers squared, which is about, I would say, a little smaller than medium size in terms of the global landscape. And into the last quote, do not let yourself get annoyed by media criticism from jealous fools who have never in their lives done anything useful. So I think this sort of sums up the kind of person he is. He's not afraid to say what he believes, and he doesn't take criticism too lightly. For example, as we've seen, he lost jobs, he's been kicked out of parties, he is obviously always been willing to bear the consequences of his words and his actions, and perhaps that's what's made him such a resilient leader to have come to the top as the first directly elected president in the history of the Czech Republic. Here is the flag of the Czech Republic. Here is the crest of Kolin, the city he was born in. Here is the symbol of the University of Economics, Prague, that he went to. Here is the symbol of the Party of Civic Rights, which he had founded and has actually not fared too well. And at the bottom here is the presidential seal that he currently holds, and is the seal of the president of the Czech Republic. So I'll definitely talk more deeply about Zeman in the comparison, particularly on his concepts regarding federalism and how it relates to Alexander Hamilton and Iohannis, after we go and cover Iohannis' life. So Klaus Werner Iohannis was born on the 13th of June 1959, so quite a bit older, about 15 years younger than Zeman. He is currently, therefore, 61 years old as well, or just recently 61 years old, actually. Or actually, pardon me, soon to be 61 years old. His birthday's in June. It's May, as of today for me. He is currently the president of Romania. He is the leader of the National Liberal Party, the PNL, and he has been the leader of this party since 2014. He is also the leader of the He was formerly the leader of the Democratic Forum of Germans in Romania from 2001 to 2013. As well, he is the first German, which was the Democratic Forum of Germans of Romania is a public a party to represent the interests of the German minority in Romania. And actually, Iohannis is the first Romanian president to come from an ethnic minority, where the Transylvanian Saxons, or the German-speaking population, is quite a small majority in Romania. He has a history of being a physics and school instructor before politics, as well as serving on school boards. As well, he was mayor of Sibiu, where he was born, as being elected in 2000, where he represented the Democratic Forum of Germans of Romania. Once again, there, he is a. It was surprising that he has come to such success, because not only in Subia is the German population a small minority, about 1.6%. In the whole of Romania, it is quite small as well. However, he has won surprising landslide victories as mayor in 2004, 2008, and 2014. He focuses his success as mayor of Subia was his focus on tourism and investing in infrastructure. In fact, Subia was named the European Capital of Culture in 2007 alongside Luxembourg, who chose to share the title, as many Transylvanian Saxons actually moved to what is modern-day Luxembourg in the 12th century. In February of 2013, the liberal leader of the National Liberal Party, Crim Antonescu, invited Iohannis to join his party, the National Liberal Party, and at that time he was immediately elected vice president of the party, and he became president of the National Liberal Party the following year in 2014. As well, previous to that, in October 2009, 4 of 5 parties proposed him as candidate as prime minister, as most as actually not most, but many other countries, there's both prime ministers and a president in Romania. However, he did not win the role as prime minister, as one individual spoke out against him, and actually the Democratic Liberal Party uncharacteristically refused his candidacy. However, twice more he was elected as prime minister, however, once again, not winning. In the 2014 elections, however, on December 21st, he became the first Romanian president to come from an ethnic minority, coming from, as mentioned, the Transylvanian Saxon or German minority, which settled in Romania around the 12th century as well. And in 2019, recently as well, he had won the election again, so he will be serving another 5-year term, as in Romania, this is their 5-year term, so we'll be seeing him for a little bit longer at least. In terms of his early life, he was born in the historic center of Sibiu, which has a population of 147,254, which is quite a bit larger than Colin, where Zeman was born. However, not particularly, not a huge city. It was once predominantly Transylvanian Saxon German dialect city. However, now it's mostly Romanian. About 1.6% are actually Transylvanian or Transylvanian Saxon or German today. It's, however, the capital is Sibiu County. Bucharest is the capital and largest city in Romania at 2 million. There are also 12 cities that are larger as well than Sibiu. So Sibiu is not even in the top 10 largest. However, most of the population is concentrated in Bucharest, and the most of the cities are between 155 to 324,000. So, although there are many cities larger than Sibiu, Sibiu is pretty average size. He is the eldest son of Gustav Haynes and Suzanne Iohannis. His younger sister Krista was born in 1963. His father, Gustav, was a technician at an enterprise, and his mother, Suzanne, was a nurse. His family immigrated to Romania Germany in 1992 when he was 33 years old, to Wurzburg, Germany, where they acquired citizenship in Germany under the right to return policy in Germany, where those with German heritage could return and gain citizenship. Many other Transylvanian Saxons did this as well after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. However, he still chose to stay and live in Romania, particularly Sibiu. However, his parents, sister, and his niece all live in Wurzburg. The family settled in he claims that his family has lived in modern-day Romania for 850 years. Hard to say if that's exactly true, but I think the point is that he is he is very loyal to Romania, and he does not consider himself to be German, despite having German citizenship. He graduated from the Faculty of Physics at Babs-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, which is the second largest city in Romania. He graduated in 1983 at 24 years old. It's the largest university in Romania. However, the top university is generally considered to be University of Bucharest, and the third is generally considered to be Alexandru Ioana Cuza University. But nonetheless, a great university. And Romania actually has a very great education system in the mathematics and sciences. Actually, one of my best high school teachers, my calculus professor, was from Romania, and really, obviously, many students did not like her method. She was very upfront, obviously, called on many students, but I think it was an excellent way to learn calculus, and it helped me very much in my later studies of calculus in university, where I scored almost perfect in my undergraduate courses. He taught physics at various high schools, so very much like my high school teacher, including Samuel von Brukenthal Gymnasium in Sibiu, which is the oldest German-speaking school in Romania. He's taught at this school from 1989 to 1997, so when he was 30 to 38 years old. In 1997 to 1999, he became Deputy General of the School Inspector of Sibiu County, and in 1999 to 2000, he became Mayor. In 2000 when he became Mayor, and in 1999 to 2000, he was General School Inspector, or Head of Public Schools in the county. So, obviously, actually, I think a parallel could be drawn, not directly, but the Prime Minister of Canada was formerly a high school teacher. I think it is naturally already in the public sector. But different from the Prime Minister of Canada, he actually climbed through the ranks of the high school chain to become head inspector of his county, and then he ultimately switched over to federal politics. Therefore, as mentioned, since he taught at the oldest German-speaking school and he's got German heritage, he is fluent in German and Romanian at a native level, and he also has learned to speak English, probably partially because of his wife is actually an English teacher. The original spelling of his last name is Iohannis. However, on his official Romanian birth certificate, it is spelled with an I, which is the Romanian spelling. However, he uses both spellings interchangeably. In 1989, he married an ethnic Romanian named Carmen Lazurca, who's an English teacher at Gihor Lazar National College in Sibiu. They have no children. I think that's important to note. But once again, that's not obviously definitely not a necessity to become a leader. And a parallel could be seen with Shinzo Abe, the leader of Japan, and Narendra Modi, both of whom have no children. Perhaps in Shinzo Abe's case, it's because he was not actually able to have a child. Narendra Modi's was by choice. Hard to say for Iohannis whether he would like to have kids or not. Perhaps he considers the children he had as a high school teacher to be his children, or perhaps he's just so busy now as president of Czech Republic that he cannot. But I think in aggregate, it is a little bit. It's unfortunate for anyone who wants to have kids to not have kids. I know I'd like to have children. If I were not given that possibility, it would be quite upsetting personally. So we could either see this as a testament to how dedicated he is to his career, or also perhaps maybe even as a little bit of a tragedy. He is a member of the Evangelical Church of Augustin Confession in Romania, which is the German-speaking Lutheran Church of Transylvania. A really cool history of Europe can be derived from the history of Martin Luther and the Protestant or the Lutheran Reformation. Very interesting. But obviously, by being Lutheran, he is not loyal to the Vatican, but sees Christianity as his guide. And he is pretty dedicated to this church as well. So in terms of his actual political career, following his career as a teacher and through the general inspector of the teachers in Sibiu and as mayor. He joined the Democratic Forum of Germans, the FDGR, in 1990, while he was member of the Board of Education in 1997. He was also a member of the local party board in 1998. However, in 2001, he was elected president of the forum. So he climbed quickly in the ranks within the FDGR, which represents the German interests in Romania. As mentioned, the German-speaking population, or German ethnic group within Sibiu, is about 1.6% of the population, but nonetheless he became mayor with 69.18% of the vote in 2000, 88.69% in 2004, and 83.26% in 2008. So he won by many landslide victories, which could be seen as quite surprising, considering if it's obviously not just the votes coming from the German minority, because there's no way 1.6% could lead to an 88.69% of the voting population. The German people, despite being an ethnic minority in Sibiu and in Romania, they're considered to be a hardworking and precise minority. He's also not only the first Romanian president to come from an ethnic minority, but he was also the first ethnic minority to become a mayor of a Romanian city since Albert Dor in 1940 to 1945, which actually, from Albert Dor's perspective, is a bit surprising, because that was just at the fall of Nazi Germany, so that's a little bit surprising. Not saying there's any connection between Germans and Nazism, but it's surprising that someone from German heritage could become president immediately following the fall of Nazi Germany. He is also, some of the people in Romania consider some of the best history, or the best periods of Romanian history, was about a century ago when German kings did rule Romania. So despite coming from an ethnic minority, it's not too far of a shoot, and there is a lot of support for the German population in Romania. As mayor of Sibiu, he is focused on infrastructure, tourism, and international investment. Therefore, in 2007, he won the European Capital of Culture for the city, alongside Luxembourg, who, as mentioned earlier, share Transylvanian Saxon heritage, as many individuals moved to what is now Luxembourg in the 12th century. In 2005, he won Personality of the Year for European Romanian by Eurolink, therefore showing that he is very partial and supports and emphasizes or manifests the ideals of the European Union. President Băsescu refused, however, to nominate Iohannis as prime minister. As mentioned, 4 out of the 5 parties wanted him to become prime minister. However, the prime minister at the time, or the president at the time, Băsescu, refused. Perhaps it said that Băsescu was interfering with the upcoming elections. However, I think Iohannis was supported by 4 out of the 5 parties because he was independent and wasn't willing to be swayed, and that's probably why Băsescu refused to elect him as the prime minister, because he thought that he couldn't control him. So the quote follows that he is not the type of person who would let himself be used. So that's perhaps, it wasn't that he was an ethnic minority that he did not win prime minister, it's that he couldn't be controlled by the president. He became the president of the National Liberal Party by 95% of the vote after leader Crim Antonescu invited him to join the party in 2013. As mentioned earlier, after Antonescu invited him to join the party, he instantly became vice president, and immediately after he became president of the party in 2014. In 2009, the former president Călin Prosecu Talekanu said that he would like to see Iohannis as president. So this was a little bit earlier, sorry to go back in time, but a little foreshadowing that many political circles and many important individuals from very high up thought that Iohannis would make a very great president, because he had performed so well as mayor of Sibiu, and therefore he was invited to join the PNL party and ultimately became president. Therefore, in 2014, the PNL merged with the PDL party to consolidate the more right-leaning parties of Romania, and he won the president role of Romania with 30.7% of the votes in the first round and 54.43% in the second round, therefore becoming president of Romania on the 16th of November 2014. In terms of his time as president and with respect to his actual policies and politics, he has focused on fighting corruption and improving the justice system. He has had generally a pro-Western foreign policy, both with respect to the EU and the United States. In terms of particularly issues, so there's been one of the key issues between Moldova and Romania is the discussion of uniting the two countries. He actually supports the unification. However, he says it is for Bucharest to offer and Chisinau to accept, which is the capital of Moldova. He says that they will discuss things when things are going well for both countries, but that actually moves to our very first quote, which is, as I mentioned, unification between Romania and Moldova is something only Bucharest can offer and Chisinau can accept. If Moldova's citizens want unification with Romania, then nobody can stop them. So I think this is a really nice approach, I think, to accept them with open arms, but never to force them. And I think that's how perhaps the Crimea could have been handled better. In terms of Hungarian autonomy, so the Hungarian population in Romania would like to have Hungarian considered the second official language of Romania. However, and they also seek autonomy of their own region in Romania. However, he is not really in favor of this because he fears division and he cautions decentralization. In Ukraine in 2017, they actually passed an education law where Ukrainian became the only language of education in state schools in Ukraine. So this is obviously something that upset Iohannis, leading to our second quote. Ukraine's new education laws will drastically limit the access of minorities to education in their native language. We are deeply hurt by this. We have many Romanians and Ukrainians in Ukraine. So obviously a little upset that Ukraine is perhaps hurting the Romanian-speaking minority in Ukraine. And this might perhaps paint an interesting picture with respect to Crimea, perhaps. If Iohannis sees that the Romanians in Ukraine are getting sort of culturally suppressed, especially having their language no longer taught in schools, perhaps the pro-Russian people in Crimea felt as though their culture was being suppressed. But obviously a very politically charged issue. In terms of LGBTQ rights, obviously these are pretty prominent in terms of modern political discourse, and it actually comes up in pretty much all of these leaders. He is generally speaking against same-sex unions, and he's reluctant to promote it. However, he does promote ethnic diversity and religious tolerance, but he's hesitant to allow for same-sex marriage and LGBTQ rights, given a lot of the conservative beliefs in the country and the large religious base that has been supporting him. Also coming from a Lutheran background, it's not necessarily fully aligned with his own beliefs, but I think as a politician or as a leader of state, he should sort of set religion aside and let the people decide what they want. If people want to express themselves as one way, so be it. And I think he's generally not he's not gripping the wheel too tight on this. He's kind of letting it play out. In terms of migration, he has accepted the migrant quota set by the EU. However, he is opposed to the mandatory nature of it, and he wishes to see stronger external European borders, but he's not in favor of stronger internal borders. So not necessarily in favor of migration, but he does accept the EU's wishes, but he does not think it should be mandatory. That's why he's generally considered a little bit more on the right. In terms of the last quote here, it is wrong to give obedience or walk the path of religious fanaticism and ultimatum solicitations. I do not believe in them and do not support them. I believe in tolerance, trust, and openness to others. So he's very religiously tolerant, and I think that's partially through his own people's acceptance of him as an ethnic minority. I think therefore he's very accepting of other people who have differing opinions. In terms of this is the flag of Romania. The population is a bit bigger than Czech Republic at 19.41 million. However, the GDP is slightly smaller at 239.6 billion. The area is 239,397 kilometers squared, so very much larger in terms of area. In terms of symbols, here is the symbol of the Transylvanian Saxons, which are the German, predominantly German people living in Romania. Here is the symbol of Sibiu, where he was born, and he also is teacher of and the mayor of. Here's the symbol of the FDGR, which is the party that supports the German minorities in Romania. Here's a symbol of the PNL party, which he rose to the top of, thanks to the endorsement by the previous leader. Here's the symbol of the president of Romania, and here is actually his own personal seal. So in terms of the comparison, I think they both didn't take no ever for an answer. It is obvious that Zeman was willing to lose jobs and willing to be removed from political parties for the opportunity to speak his own opinions. As well, Iohannis comes from a ethnic minority in Romania, and he's still stuck to his commitment to create for a better Romania, and still ultimately rose to the top of leadership. They are both populists, as you could see from both of their great success in both the polls and having risen to the top. And they both sort of followed their passion, you could say. Iohannis did become a teacher and taught physics, something that he obviously, I don't think was doing for the money, but something that obviously interested him. As well, Zeman went and joined a sports organization to once again follow his passion. In terms of differences, one is an atheist, one is a Lutheran, one is a little bit more right-leaning, and one is a bit more left-leaning. However, they both are generally to the right. They're both generally tolerant to other people, but most of all, the main message I want to get across and is elucidated by Alexander Hamilton is that they're both, generally speaking, federalists. And what by that I mean they're both in favor of the European Union. So I think here's where we get to the quote by Alexander Hamilton. So, those who stand for nothing fall for everything. So a lot of people, a lot of top intellectuals say that the EU is about to collapse, which is I think very obvious. I think unless actions are taken to keep the EU together and keep the EU strong, it will naturally trend towards collapse. So in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton quotes the Amphictyonic League and the Achaean League, where both ultimately were amalgamations of Greek states that ultimately fell into anarchy. And he states that federalist states are more likely to fall into anarchy than they are to fall into tyranny. And this is because, he quotes that one is more likely to love themselves and their family unless active steps are taken. One is more likely to love their family than to love their community. One is more likely to love their community than their province. One is more likely to love their province than the federal state. And this is just a natural trend that happens if actions are not taken otherwise. That's why I think in the book of Leviticus it says, love thy neighbor. It's not tolerate thy neighbor. If actions are not particularly taken to love thy neighbor, it'll naturally trend towards division. For example, if you have someone who lives down the hall or a roommate, and if you don't say hi to them, if you don't actively try to create a relationship between you and them, it'll naturally trend towards enemyship. If same thing with a family. If you do not actively try to have meals together, if you not try to actively create relationships, it'll naturally trend towards anarchy or opposition. If you have a friend, if you do not actively try to make friendship with them, it'll naturally, slowly, eventually lead to their becoming an enemy. And I think the same thing applies to, firstly, this is what Alexander Hamilton hoped to achieve in the United States, in that if the states were not did not form a strong federal, not confederate government, it would naturally lead to antagonism, and that's what they saw in ancient Greece. Obviously, the biggest worry and the biggest criticism of the Federalist Papers and Alexander Hamilton's writings and John Jay's writings and James Madison's writings was that perhaps tyranny might be the cause. But I think tyranny is, if there is a monarchical government, it will naturally trend towards tyranny. But in federalist states, I think it will always trend towards anarchy, because one is more likely to love oneself, one's family, and as it moves out towards the government. So a strong federal government is needed. So therefore, a strong European Union is needed and needs to be constantly promoted. Otherwise, it'll naturally lead to anarchy and it will naturally collapse. So to the intellectuals out there who think, oh, the EU is inevitably going to collapse, well, I think obviously unless active steps are not taken. And I think that's what the best and most important benefit of Milos Zeman and Klaus Iohannis is that they believe, despite oftentimes differing opinions, sometimes they aren't necessarily in favor of the migration issues, they believe that the European Union should be strong, and if people like these individuals don't exist, and if it is not constantly reinforced, it will naturally collapse. So I think these people are doing something very important, and I think if Alexander Hamilton or John Jay or James Madison or the writers of the Federalist Papers were alive today, I think they would believe that a strong EU is necessary, because if people like Milos Zeman and Klaus Iohannis do not exist to keep it together, and the EU does collapse, I think it is an inevitability that there will once again be a war between the states in Europe. So it must be kept together, and the federalist ideology must be maintained. So that is the main message I wanted to get across in terms of Milos Zeman and Klaus Iohannis. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something about these two individuals, perhaps about or the variety of topics that I have mentioned. And I hope you continue to watch some of the other, or listen to some of the other videos or speeches I'll be giving in the future. And yeah, thank you so much.